Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Okay. Hi guys, original link to the video, top of the description, right below that, link to the Discord. Click on it, send right over there. Would love to have you. Phones away. Even if you are watching on one, toss it. If you are not ready to learn, there is a door. Home ec is down the hall. You are in the wrong class. Preemptive like, Rise of the Cossacks, Origins of the Ukrainians. And then I saw some of you guys commenting I should watch the Kings and Generals, the war going on over there right now, and I will do that, and I think this is a good starting point. I hope you're all doing well. My name's Connor. I like to learn. Let's go.
Somewhere by the Black Sea coast, a young Cossack mounts his horse. He fondly says goodbye to his girl, and even more fondly says goodbye to Ukraine. In our previous video on the history of pre-modern Ukraine, we provided a brief survey of the ancient and medieval history of the lands that make up modern Ukraine, culminating with the formation of the Kingdom of Ruthenia. In the second part of this series, as we move on to the early modern era, we will focus on a very specific yet fundamental pillar of Ukrainian ethnogenesis: Cossacks, the free men of the wild plains. The closest thing to such freedom we have today is the internet, and like the Cossacks, you need gear to protect that freedom.
Make sure to use the /Kings and Generals, guys.
You can try our deal from NordVPN. They let you direct your internet traffic through extremely fast servers all over the world with a single click. This masks your location and encrypts your data to prevent ISPs and trackers from compiling and selling your digital footprint, and it avoids any throttling of download speeds. Or for high security needs, use their double VPN with double the encryption. With over 5,600 servers in 59 countries, NordVPN gives you easy access to region-locked content, such as TV shows, movies, or games, or even to get different prices on the same items. You can just pick a server on their map and you'll get anything that region has to offer. It's also great for accessing your stuff while traveling, or using free Wi-Fi, where normally you'd be particularly vulnerable to having critical data stolen. You get protection on 6 devices, so you can secure your phones and laptops when away from home at no extra cost. Plus, tests have shown NordVPN to be the fastest provider out there. You can get a massive discount at nordvpn.com/kingsandgenerals, and you also get a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk trying it out. The story of the Cossacks begins with the lands of modern Ukraine under foreign rule, but not by who you might expect. In 1323, the Kingdom of Ruthenia was ruled jointly by 2 brother kings, Andrew and Lev II, the great-grandsons of the kingdom's founder, Danilo. It was that year that disaster struck, as both were killed in a battle fought against their ostensible suzerain, Uzbek Khan of the Golden Horde. As neither brother had any heirs, Danilo's branch of the Rurikid bloodline went extinct, and Ruthenia was left without a rightful ruler. Caught in such a state of vulnerability, the Ruthenian kingdom came into the crosshairs of 2 up-and-coming powers, Poland and Lithuania. To vastly oversimplify a half-decade of complex political jockeying, the Kingdom of Ruthenia was ultimately partitioned between the Kingdom of Poland and the Grand Duchy of Lithuania, who carved it in twain along the historic borders of the Principalities of Galicia and Volhynia. Surprisingly enough, it was the Lithuanians who, for a time, were the most powerful overlords in the proto-Ukrainian world. Under the dynamic Grand Duke Gediminas, the last pagan country in Europe had become a mighty military juggernaut, remarkably defeating the seemingly invincible Mongol juggernaut of the Golden Horde to annex not just the far west Principality of Volhynia, but also lands in eastern and central Ukraine, such as Chernihiv, Pereyaslav, Podolia, and even Kyiv. At the dawn of the 1400s, nearly all the historic Rus princedoms were either under Polish or Lithuanian rule. At the onset, this was not a terrible arrangement, and the Lithuanians in particular were light rulers. However, in the centuries that followed, the self-determination of the Ruthenian religion, language, and culture in the occupied territories was gradually rolled back. The catalyst for this began in 1385, when a matrimonial union between Grand Duke Jogaila and Queen Jadwiga united the Grand Duchy of Lithuania and the Kingdom of Poland. In order to secure this union, the Lithuanian Duke officially converted to Catholicism, the faith of the Poles. This had twofold implications. The last vestige of paganism in Europe was snuffed, while the influence of Ruthenian Orthodox Christianity in his realm declined. Then, in 1569, after a series of arrangements that entwined Poland and Lithuania ever closer to one another politically, the Union of Lublin officially merged the two sides into one Commonwealth. Per the terms of the Union, Ruthenian lands were annexed into the administration of the Polish crown, under which the
Look at Prussia at the time, completely engulfed. Doesn't have the kind of Stettin area.
Ruthenian lands were annexed into the administration of the Polish crown, under which the Polish language, culture and faith was predominant, and the old Orthodox Rus elite faced ever more pressure to convert to...
Sorry, that makes me wonder, where did Prussia go from... How did they gain over here? Okay.
Catholicism, and the old Orthodox Rus elite faced ever more pressure to convert to Catholicism and Polonize. The squeeze of Polish rule on Ruthenian lands was felt not only among the native nobility, but the peasantry as well. Under Ruthenian and later Lithuanian rule, the majority of medieval Ukraine's land had been owned by small landowners and tilled by free peasants. However, as profits from grain exports increased in the 15th century, the land was opened up to Polish Catholic nobles, magnates and small landowners were replaced by huge latifundia agricultural estates. Consequently, the peasantry who formerly enjoyed freedom of movement was shackled into serfdom, bound to the land of their Catholic lords, and forced to uphold strict agricultural obligations to their masters. During the time of the Polish-Lithuanian rule, the lands of western Ukraine were urbanized, cosmopolitan, and highly developed. However, the same could not be said for the east. The reason for this was the Crimean Khanate, a successor state of the Golden Horde, who considered the fields of Ukraine to be theirs, since it had once belonged to the Mongol Khans, and thus annually raided into Commonwealth.
In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. The Crimean Khan sends a letter to Grand Duke Alexander of Lithuania that Cossacks had attacked a Tatar ship on the Dnieper, marking the first time Cossacks show up in the written record. Interesting.
Commonwealth lands for slaves, turning eastern Ukraine into a long, violent and volatile frontier. To fortify this region, the Lithuanians built a string of forts along the frontier, which they garrisoned with mercenaries, originally of mostly Tatar Turkic origin, but later joined by Slavic militias too. However, since these forts were so far away from the governing centers of the Grand Duchy, they went rogue and became autonomous military communities unto themselves.
Jeez.
Later on, princes and nobles within the Polish Commonwealth began incentivizing peasants to move into those steppe borderlands, offering them exemptions from taxes and indentured labor in return for developing the dangerous land. However, when the Polish aristocrats attempted to reimpose the tenets of serfdom upon these fledgling communities, many of the now freedom-accustomed peasants refused to be collared to a lord once again, and fled further eastwards and southwards to the fields along the lower Dnieper River, dangerously close to the domain of the slavers of the Crimean Khanate. There, the runaways likely intermingled with the already autonomous mercenary freebooters in the region. Abandoning their agricultural lifestyle, they armed themselves and began roaming the wild plains as hunters and brigands. Over the next century, the lands of...
That's really cool. So the Khanate down here presenting a risk to the Poland, Lithuania. They send people to garrison, and then they send peasants to till, produce or cultivate the land, and then they end up kind of becoming their own thing. Wow.
Wild plains as hunters and brigands. Over the next century, the lands of eastern Ukraine continued to serve as an escape valve for the disenfranchised to flee Polish aristocratic rule without struggling against it. Not only peasants took this route, but indebted nobles and defrocked priests as well. It would be this diverse cast
Deep
of
rock.
misfits who would ultimately form the core of an emergent free Cossack society. Thus, at its core, Cossackdom at its onset was not a nation or race, but a shared lifestyle that valued freedom from the traditional feudal hierarchy. Let us now take a break from the
That's awesome.
march of history to essentialize what life as a Cossack was like. Although most of the Cossacks never abandoned their agricultural ways, a sizable portion lived a quasi-nomadic lifestyle, sustaining themselves by hunting in the steppes and fishing along the rivers. They roamed the wild plains in covered wagons, which were always ready to be drawn up into a defensive square formation in the event of an attack. Indeed, true to their popular image, the average Cossack was a warlike individual. In the early stages of their existence, their principal enemy was the raiders of the Crimean and Nogai Khanates, with whom they cohabited the steppe frontier. Despite their popular image as cowboy-esque horsemen, the majority of Cossacks fought as infantrymen. However, they still focused on mobility, speed, and hit-and-run tactics, with the rifle as their primary weapon, which they wielded with dead-eye accuracy.
It's the Texas of it. No.
At sea, the Cossacks were strategic lightning raiders, plying their long
Wow, so Crimea is really almost an island, or is it not? Because Sea of Azov, right?
rowing galleys to strike Tatar forts along
I always get sad when I see the Caspian Sea. I just wish it was connected to something else.
the Danube River, and sometimes going even further, brutally
Ooh, it almost is, sorta. Oh, that would be so cool. That would be so awesome. I always see the Caspian Sea, and I'm like, ooh, I wish that was just sort of connected to some way to get to the ocean so that you'd have vast areas of Central Asia. I just see Central Asia, and I get, like, if only they had a little bit more ease of access, and that would kind of give them that.
sacking the coastal Anatolian settlements of the mighty Ottoman Empire. In that sense, the Cossacks fought in a manner not unlike the Varangian Vikings of old. Although the Cossacks spent most of their time on the roam, eventually permanent settlements did begin building up around where they gathered. Eventually, these settlements became bustling trade entrepôts, and peoples as far-flung as Muscovites, Persians, Greeks, Armenians, and Jews began gravitating towards the wild plains to trade for the gold, jewelry, slaves, and animals accumulated by the Cossacks on their hunts and raids. As a result, these settlements grew profusely wealthy, but despite this, Cossack society was remarkably egalitarian for the time. According to legend, all wealth in Cossack compounds was owned collectively, with individuals' homes remaining unlocked and open at all times.
Collective?
Although this is not grounded in historical fact. What is certain is that Cossack society was democratic. While hierarchy did exist in Cossack brotherhoods, with individual bands usually led by a supreme leader known as a hetman or ataman, decisions that affected the entire brotherhood were voted upon by public military councils, known as radas, where the rule of the majority reigned supreme. Oftentimes, hetmans themselves were elected officials and could be removed or even executed if they acted against the collective interests of his brotherhood. The roots of Cossack democracy likely stem from many places, with some claiming the Cossacks adopted the social structure of their Turkic neighbors, others arguing it was a symptom of their desire to be free of Polish feudalism, and others claiming that its roots could be found in the inherently democratic customs of the old Kievan Rus. This brings us to the topic of language and religion, for while the Cossacks were always a multi-ethnic phenomenon, and originally their hetmans were mostly Polish-speaking Catholics, over time, the importance of the Ruthenian language and Ruthenian Orthodox Christianity predominated as symbolic speartips of their martial culture. Now let us briefly zoom out and examine the world that the Cossacks inhabit.
Man. I want to get a nice big map over there. I'll buy them. Of like of Europe, or of like Europe, Middle East, North Africa, of like the major border chain, like just to see like an evolution of like the main map borders, you know,
Inhabited.
from like pre-Roman to now.
By the 16th century, Eastern Europe was a theatre contested by three main spheres of power. The first was, of course, the Polish...
Sorry, look at Naples. I want to learn about Naples. Of Venice and Genoa, of course. Florence.
Lithuanian Commonwealth. The second was the Ottoman Empire, exercising influence through their vassals, the aforementioned Crimean Khanate. The third was the Muscovites, who in 1480 had ended the last vestiges of Mongol rule over the historic territories of northern Rus and gone on an expansionist campaign that included the annexation of Chernihiv and Smolensk, marking the first time any Ukrainian lands came under the rule of Moscow. A century later, Ivan IV, yes, the terrible one, founded the Tsardom of Russia. Nestled between sultans, khans, tsars, and Catholic kings, the Cossacks would rise and thrive. Of course, at the onset, the Cossacks were, at least ostensibly, living on lands belonging to the Polish crown, who found themselves in a quandary regarding their Cossack squatters. On one hand, they were openly defiant of the feudal authorities of the Polish crown, but on the other hand, they were extremely useful as a buffer in fighting off Tatar raids into Commonwealth lands. In the 1570s, the Polish king, Stefan Batory,
The Ottomans have that far north, huh?
tried to two birds, one stone the situation by incorporating the Cossacks into the royal army of the Commonwealth through a registry system. This was largely a failure. Firstly, because the Polish government rarely paid the Cossacks their promised salaries, and secondly, because the free-willed Cossacks were ever reticent to fight for any cause other than their own. Moreover, only a small minority of Cossacks were given the legal status of being registered, meaning the Polish government still saw the majority of them as illegal troublemakers and expected them to disband. All this led to increasing tensions between the Cossacks and the Commonwealth crown. Still, the registered Cossacks, as few as they were integrated into the Polish state apparatus, and their leaders were even legitimized as quasi-nobility, given lands and estates to run. This, however, would backfire spectacularly. In 1590, a Cossack hetman by the name of Krzysztof Kozinski was a state master of some peasant villages in eastern Ukraine. This, however, put him in competition with the region's most powerful noble family, the Ostrog Kozinski. In 1590, a Cossack hetman by the name of Krzysztof Kozinski was a state master of some peasant villages in eastern Ukraine. This, however, put him in competition with the region's most powerful noble family, the Ostrogskis, the Palatines of Kiev. Initially, the Ostrogskis were a Ruthenian-speaking Eastern Orthodox family, but that did not end up mattering when they tried to confiscate Kosinski's lands, and in so doing, triggered a massive Cossack uprising against not only themselves, but their Polish overlords as well. This revolt was put down by 1593 with the help of another band of registered Cossacks, led by the hetman Severin Nalivayko. Of course, it took less than a year for Nalivayko to go rogue himself, as he allied himself with the unregistered Cossacks and launched his own rebellion against the Ostrogskis and the Polish crown. This too was put down in 1596, but it left a desolated eastern Ukraine in its wake. Neither the Poles nor their Ruthenian magnates gained much from their victories either, for although active challenges against their rule were for now stymied, Cossack bands continued to operate out on the wild plains, out of reach of their effective jurisdiction. Indeed, at the dawn of the 17th century, the Cossack brotherhoods were doing more or less whatever they felt like doing. Sometimes this meant...
How is Crimea still an independent place after being, like, completely cut off from, I'm assuming, any other kind of Khanate towards the east, right?
Aiding the Polish crown, as they did in 1618, when 20,000 of the free brotherhoods were doing more or less whatever they felt like doing. Sometimes this meant aiding the Polish crown, as they did in 1618, when 20,000 of the free riders, led by Hetman Petro Konashevich-Sahydechny, joined the Polish army in a march on Moscow during the Russian Tsardom's time of troubles, helping the Poles win land at Russia's expense. Other times, this meant causing trouble. In 1616, they brutally sacked Kaffa, the main slave-trading city in the Crimean Khanate, and freed all its slaves. This eventually provoked a massive reprisal from Sultan Osman II, who led a 120,000-strong army into the Polish Commonwealth in 1621,
Big army.
only to be stopped by an alliance of Polish crown forces and registered Cossacks at the dramatic month-long Battle of Kotin. Indeed, the Cossacks proved excellent at solving problems that they themselves had caused, and as much as they enjoyed fighting with the Commonwealth crown when it suited them, so too did they enjoy fighting against it. 1625, 1630, 1637, and 1638 were all years where Cossack rebellions flared up due to the state policy of Polonization and the suppression of the Ruthenian Orthodox Church. But although each one was crushed, the Cossacks were always either too useful or too stubborn for the Polish state to eradicate entirely. This would prove to be Poland's ultimate failing, for in the following decade, a terminus uprising would erupt that would finally see the Cossack plains break free from their Commonwealth for good. In the year 1648, a Cossack officer by the name of Bohdan Khmelnytsky served as a minor landholder and loyal soldier of the Polish crown. That is until, evidently having learned nothing from the Cossack Rebellion 50 years earlier, a Polish magnate tried to confiscate Khmelnytsky's lands. When the Cossack protested, his political opponents threw him into prison for his troubles. However, Bohdan escaped, and now thoroughly disillusioned with the Polish state he served, he went directly to the largest settlement of the wild, unregistered Cossacks, the Zaporozhian Sich, and began riling them up with firebrand talk of rebellion. Consequently, the freebooters of the Sich quickly elected Khmelnytsky as their ataman, and thus the insurrection had begun. Khmelnytsky
Sorry, I had to pee quick. I washed my hands.
as their ataman, and thus the insurrection had begun. Khmelnytsky was no fool. He knew that to succeed where the previous 6 Cossack uprisings had failed, he would need to draw allies from unconventional places. To that end, he turned to the traditionally bitter rival of the Ukrainian freebooters, the Crimean Khan. Seeing opportunity in this unlikely alliance, the Khan agreed to help and deployed 4,000 Turkic horse archers from his vassals in the Nogai Horde to join Khmelnytsky's cause. With strong Cossack infantry paired up with deadly Tatar light cavalry, Bohdan advanced against the Poles, crushing them in 2 battles at the Zhovty River and the town of Korsun. Not only was the campaigning ability of the Polish crown forces effectively crippled by these victories, it also caused 6,000 registered Cossacks, who had previously been serving Polish magnates, to instead defect to Khmelnytsky's cause. Meanwhile, chaos erupted throughout every layer of Ukrainian society. Throughout the villages and towns, Ruthenian-speaking Orthodox Christian peasants rose up against their Polish overlords, as riots, vendettas, and lynchings against Catholics became the order of the day. But Catholics were not the only victims. For some 14,000 to 20,000 Jewish peoples, blamed by Cossacks and the general peasantry alike for being long-time conspirators with the Polish elite, were massacred in a brutal, prolonged pogrom. By autumn, Khmelnytsky's army had marauded its way as far west as King Danilo's historical capital of Lviv. In December, the ataman entered Kyiv, Danilo's historical capital. Khmelnytsky's army had marauded its way as far west as King Danilo's historical capital of Lviv. In December, the ataman entered Kyiv, the symbolic urban cradle of Rus. There, the Orthodox Metropolitan of Kyiv declared Khmelnytsky to be prince, and declared his war to be a most holy crusade against Catholic oppression. Thereafter, Hetman Bohdan declared himself to be the sole master of the historical Kievan Rus lands, a true heir to Volodymyr and Yaroslav. The Cossacks, originally a ragtag collection of fugitives and misfits, had become nation builders, and the nation they built was the genesis of the modern Ukrainian state. In the summer of 1649, a coalition of Khmelnytsky's Cossacks and Crimean Tatars won a final battle over the Polish army outside the town of Zaborov. After that, the war was pretty much over, and a new, effectively independent nation, the Cossack Hetmanate, was born. It is with the creation of the Cossack Hetmanate, arguably the first independent and distinctively Ukrainian state to exist in the early modern era, that we will end this chapter of our series on pre-modern history. However, to win freedom is one thing, but to keep it is another matter entirely. Ukraine was sandwiched between the vengeful Poles, the mighty hosts of Sultan Osman, and most importantly, the ever zealously expansionist Tsars of Moscow. The free Cossacks of the wild plains would face many challenges ahead in their bid to preserve their right to self-determination. Our mini-series will continue in the coming months, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing. It helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the
Awesome video. Good. Now I'm going to get into the more modern, the conflict going on right now, the war over there in Ukraine. And because a few of you have asked me to do it, and I don't know why I haven't done them already, to be honest. So I'm going to do them right now. Hope you're all doing well. If not, chin up. You'll be good soon. And if you are in Ukraine, obviously with the war going on, I am sitting here in my comfy little room, far away from any conflict, and it's hard for me to come up with any words, really, but I hope you're doing the best you can, and best of luck to you guys. All right, I'll see you guys next time. Bye.